All right. Welcome everyone to this meeting. It is Filecoin Core Devs number 49. Today in the Western Hemisphere is Thursday, September 1st, 2022. Thank you all for coming. Some great conversations already going on, but this is going to be a jam-packed meeting, I think, today. So a reminder, please try and keep focused. And if you have any questions, as always, raise hands, feel free to jump in, etc. Today's agenda, a welcome, which is this, and then as discussed publicly, we're going to have discussions around product requirements. In FIP 45, we're going to have a discussion of FIP 47, which is now known as Proof Expiration and Security Policy, and finally go over the B17 network upgrade plan, look at some hard dates, and also discuss the remaining governance pathway for FIP 36 in particular. Also want to keep it very brief, but do want to draw attention that we have a new person on the call today, in particular, Lucky, or Kayla Chukwu. He has joined us at the foundation, and he is our new and first ever governance project manager. So he is beginning his onboarding now, hopefully taking part in Launchpad in this next cycle, but he will be joining us going forward, and you will all get to know him over the coming days. So without further ado, I believe we're going to start by handing it off to Alex North.
Okie dokie. Thank you. So recently we published a draft actual FIP for something we've been working on for some weeks now, which the background for this is motivated by FIP 36, the sector duration multiplier. As part of their change, they proposed increasing the maximum sector commitment duration from the 1.5 years that it is now to a full 5 years, so that, which is a good thing generally, so that providers can make long commitments to storage that will be committed to the network for a long period of time, and then of course also included multipliers for those longer commitments. That change threatens a sort of security mechanism present in the protocol right now, which is a mitigation in case that we discover flaws in the proof of replication theory or implementation that underlies all of the storage-powered consensus security of the network. Such a bug has been discovered before, and this mechanism was effectively used to mitigate it, and all of the sectors that were part of that bug, I believe, have probably rotated out of the system by now. I haven't quite done the math, but they were unable to be extended, and a new more secure PROREP was mandated. So this proposal separates the validity, the duration for which a PROREP proof is valid from the duration for which a sector is committed. Instead of them both being 1.5 years, it now allows the sector to be committed for 5 years, while the PROREP retains a 1.5 year validity period and needs to be refreshed every 1.5 years. This ends up being essentially the same process that a provider would take today, where they can commit for 1.5 years, and then at the end of that 1.5 years, they can extend for another 1.5 years, and they can do that 3 times to get to a 5-year total term. The flow instead would here be that they can commit upfront for 5 years, possibly getting a multiplier if the FIP 36 is approved. But then still every 1.5 years, they've got to come in and tick the box to extend their proof validity for another 1.5 years. The point of this is that if we discover a flaw in PROREP, we can disable extending the validity of existing proofs. And over the course of the next 1.5 years, all of those proofs, all of those sectors will be forced to expire and be replaced, that'd be optionally replaced at the provider's discretion by a new sector sealed with a new, more secure PROREP. If it turns out that we can implement some kind of, depending on what goes wrong with PROREP, if anything ever does, it might turn out that there's tricks where we can leave the sector in place and just fix its, essentially reseal it in place. But at the moment, we have no known techniques for doing that, and it would depend what went wrong with the PROREP and what the fix was as to whether that's possible. So the base case is that we those sectors can no longer have their proofs extended, and the provider must submit a new one. And the basic economic policy behind this is sort of the main behavioral change from the status quo today. the economic change is that a provider who's made a commitment for 5 years, and then we disallow their proof to be refreshed, would have to commit a new sector to replace it, or they would face a termination fee for their old sector not meeting its commitment.
Sorry,
So,
can you repeat that last sentence? I feel like I missed your point.
Yeah, the policy difference between this and the status quo is today in the status quo, a private provider cannot commit to 5 years up front. They can only make a 1.5 year commitment. So at the end of that 1.5 years, they're never facing a termination fee if they decide not to refresh their sector, or if they're forbidden from refreshing their sector because the proof is invalid. With this new one, if a provider makes a 5 year commitment, but then we disallow them from refreshing their proof, they will face a termination fee unless they replace the sector. But they can replace the sector, and then we'll forgive them one fee for every new sector they seal. We'll forgive them one termination fee, which is a bit similar to the replacement mechanism that was in place some time ago for CC upgrade before we implemented snap deals. So a long shot is this change is required, in my view, if we were to accept FIP 36, because otherwise we lose this this key mechanism that allows us to cycle over all of the sector proofs in a 1.5 year period, and gives us a worst case 1.5 year period to flush any bad proofs out of the system. It's also independently valuable because it lets us do one out of the 3 pieces that FIP 36 was proposing, which is just increase the maximum commitment to 5 years. There would, this FIP 47 on its own doesn't provide any incentive to have a long commitment, but it would allow providers to accept a deal that was 5 years long. And so there would be an incentive to seal a 5 year sector if you're going to put a 5 year deal in it. And so we in fact end up, I think, seeing that the only providers who use this functionality would be those providers who are taking full plus deals. And so, if anything, this makes it slightly, makes that full plus data cap more valuable because it'll be a 5 year term rather than a 1.5 year term. That's independent of FIP 45, which is of course another topic here. But this on its own, independent of any of the other proposals, has this benefit of allowing us to take 5 year deals by making this decoupling.
Yeah, Jennifer, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just have a question, just like looking at this FIP alone. I'm curious, like when a storage provider first commit a sector, say 5 years, do they put down the collateral at the beginning of the commitment, or do they put down more, do we recalculate the collateral when you extend their expiration commitment?
The terminology is a bit off there, but no, if they make a 5 year commitment, then they will put collateral down once, which will be stable for the whole 5 years. Without multipliers, it'll just be the normal collateral for that.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I see.
But the collateral is not recalculated when they refresh their proof. No.
I understand. Yeah, I'm just wondering because collateral is the value, the amount of the collateral, despite any multiplier, right? The base collateral of each sector can increase or decrease in 5 years, time span based on how network goes. So I'm just wondering, will storage provider take that into consideration before making 5 years long commitment? But I agree with this paper, but always good because this at least gave the option for storage provider to consider 3 years or 5 years, given all the crypto econ parameters the network has. But yeah, cool.
Lauren, go ahead. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so best case in 18 months, they have to reseal the data and do the proof?
No, the proof refresh thing here is merely it's just a token message. They don't have to do any work. They just have to say, I'm refreshing my proof. It's more like asking permission of the network to refresh their proof. They're asking permission, is this ProRep algorithm still valid for another 1.5 years? And the network just says yes. There's no resealing involved.
Okay, but if we found a flaw, then they would have to reseal.
Yes. If we find a flaw, the only way we know to regain the power is to re-execute a new seal.
I gotcha. So that does put more risk on them for taking a 5 year deal.
Yes.
Do we think that SPs really understand and have seen this proposal?
Look, it's relative. The concrete write-up for it is relatively new. It's been as a place, the discussion post motivating it is now some weeks old. But this concrete mechanism is relatively new. Like I said, it's motivated by FIP36. I probably wouldn't have got it this concrete if FIP36 wasn't pushing. If I didn't consider it a prerequisite for FIP36. But now that we've got this far, it's independently. We've realized it's independently valuable. It's not mandatory to get. If FIP36 is not accepted, it's not mandatory to put it in network for 17. It would be possible to wait. Be slightly annoying to the implementers since we've already written the code for it, but it's possible to defer it.
And also just to note, this is the name of the official FIP draft with the FIP number. This was previously listed as the PO-rep policy, and as Alex mentioned, has been available for quite a while now. It's also previously been presented to core devs. And if anyone wants a link to that meeting recording where there's greater detail added, we can share it as well. I think it was meeting 43, but I'm not sure, so I can follow up with you. Deep, do you have a question?
Yeah, so it looks like in the chat, like FIP36 is going to be adjusted down to a max duration of 3.5 years. Does that mean that this would also be adjusted down to a duration of 3.5 years? Or will this still be at 5? And if yes, then is the max multiplier for sector still 3.5?
I feel like is a question related to FIP 47 because like I want us to finish this and move on to FIP 36, which will be a bigger thing. Because like I think the whole point here, the FIP itself, without FIP 36, if it's variable, should we, it should also be considered as a priority for networking, either a V70 or the upcoming upgrade. We don't know. I think we should discuss that later.
Wait,
Yeah.
so you're saying that we should consider this independent of FIP36, or we should consider this together independent of FIP36? Okay, but then this would enable sectors to be locked for 5 years, even if deals would have a different maximum term, basically.
Yeah,
I don't understand the last bit of your question. It would allow sectors to be committed for 5 years. Yes.
Cool. Even if the deal max was something shorter, because it sounds like
No.
Okay, so the
Like
deal
that-
max would also be 5 years.
Jen is right to stress that we should, in the first case, consider all of these changes independently.
Okay.
This change allows a sector to be committed for 5 years. If some other FIP like 45 demands that the sector not be longer than its deal, then that constraint will also apply. But
Cool.
The maximum
That makes sense.
will go up from 1.
Okay. And then this FIP is not technically a dependency for 36, but would make 36 much easier to implement.
No, it doesn't change the implementation of FIP36. It removes what I consider to be a security flaw that FIP36 introduces.
Great, thank you. That helps me.
And Ayush.
Yeah, I don't want to take up too much time. So maybe we can take a discussion. I think I like this proposal. I've always liked the simplicity of it. It's a nice, elegant way to diffuse a potential bomb, and so yeah, I'm overall favorable. I think a couple of thoughts that I have are I think I understand why it has to be the case, but I think it's unfortunate that a sector that was committed for a 5-year period and then rendered unextendable, or its POREP was rendered unextendable, has to face a termination fee if it's not resealed. I think I understand why that has to be the case, especially if there are deals in it, but that feels bad. It feels a little difficult to request storage providers to reseal those sectors when they thought that they were sealing them once and would be fine to have it live for 5 years. So yeah, maybe I'd like to consider the possibility of waiving the termination fee in that case if possible. Thought number 2. Yeah, go ahead.
Yep. Yes, I agree. We need more modeling to understand what the effects of the network would be of various penalties applied to a sector in that situation where we're essentially forcing resealing. I think I'm not convinced that the termination fee is the right value, and that a smaller value wouldn't be better for the network as a whole. But we've got to pick something to like telegraph the policy to providers in this proposal so that they're prepared. They're prepared for this eventuality if they do go and make a 5-year commitment. It may well be that we can do better modeling and reduce that fee in the future. But
sure, yeah,
I can't do that now.
Yeah, I think that would be good. Second thought is So if I'm understanding correctly, this is going into the details of the system a little bit, but the expiration queues for these sectors will not change as a result of this policy. Like they will still be, so if I've committed a 5-year sector, they will still be scheduled to expire 1.5 years from now, and the re-extension happen, and then the extend sector expiration, or what if there's a new method, will we move that forward. If that is the case, and I see you nodding, would it be possible to automatically extend so that service providers don't have to explicitly extend these sectors? If I see that you've committed something for 5 years, and at the time of your expiration, the system can check that the POREP is in fact still valid. Can that just slide it forward by another 1.5 years?
That's a really good question. I have to think about it. It may be possible.
That's good.
Yeah, Jen's saying no more cron. Cron's already implementing this.
Cron's happening at this point, right?
So,
But we have
so
to do
if
that
I,
for submit window post anyways, right? Sorry, Kuba, go ahead.
yeah, so one way to do it would be to do it on submit window post, but I strongly prefer this interaction point of storage provider going and sending this message and getting like it being an interaction point, and that interaction being disallowed in the future, because it clearly signals to the tooling and so on that in future when extension of such sector is disallowed, that some action should be taken.
Yeah, let's take this offline. This is a good design discussion.
Yeah,
This is not
it's a good discussion. Agreed.
So related to this flip itself, not like the technical design, is I think it's being proposed as a maybe could be considered in NE17. I'm not sure if we want to get into that right now or post FIP 36. Stephen has a hand first.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I had reviewed this proposal. I think it's very good. It's a provides the flexibility for us to have a longer duration of the sectors, and also could have the security issue be handled here. One thing I want to mention is that which is also increased the complexity of the proof actually, especially for all the SPs. When you I would suggest we have some guidance, some write-up for SPs to follow, to list some scenarios, and in many scenarios the storage providers can follow to avoid any for example this kind of penalty which might be happen. And also in our implementations, I would like, firstly we try our best to make it bug compliance. I mean that for example the proof expiration and the sector expiration will be the same, right? And later on we will have some other change to make it much more flexible.
I don't quite understand the second part of your question. To the first part, this does change slightly change the operational characteristic for a provider who makes a commitment that's longer than 1.5 years. For someone who just does 1.5 year commitments, there's no change here. Their proof will never expire before the sector does. But if they do take on the greater than 1.5 year expiration, that provider has to be online to make the proof refresh call at some point in the 4 months before the proof expires, and they will face a penalty if they don't do it. Now, this is just in the normal case. I'm not talking about in the case where we have discovered a bug in POREP. It's difficult to precisely describe today what our options are in case we discover a bug in POREP, because it depends a lot on the severity of the bug and exactly what it is and exactly what a improved POREP would look like. This is sort of the shape of thing of like, well, your sectors are all going to expire, and if you don't replace them, you'll probably pay a fee, is sort of the most detail we can really give about that hypothetical situation, which hopefully never happens.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks, Alex. I think for the sake of time, we're going to jump over to talking about FIP45. If there are additional questions about the parameters or specs for FIP47, definitely take a look at the existing FIP draft and feel free to comment, ask questions in all of the usual places. But for now, I think we're going to jump down and switch topics. For good or for bad, I think it's for good. Alex, this one is also yours. Do you want to introduce latest thinking or work that you and your team have been doing?
Yeah, so the FIP45 draft is approaching completeness now with sort of a couple of notable pieces that are not fully resolved. And so I want to raise them here for discussion, make sure they're part of the discussion. Someone, thanks for posting the link to discussion 313. There's also a link to the FIP draft itself. A couple of points are, one of the points is what policy the built-in market actor should take when creating allocations on behalf of its clients. One of the key changes that this FIP45 introduces is that the term for a fill plus allocation can be a range. So it has a minimum and a maximum duration for which the fill plus allocation will be valid, and it can earn the full QA multiplier throughout any part of that range. The reason for this range is so that deals from multiple, so that deals with multiple different fill plus allocations can be packed into the same sector, as long as their ranges overlap. They're mutually compatible and can be put into the same sector, because the key mechanism that implements an upper limit on the life of a fill plus allocation that this proposal introduces is that the sector must expire before the fill plus allocation expires. So if you have a fill plus allocation that's good for 3 years, you cannot put that in a 5-year sector. Our guarantee that you'll stop being incentivized after 3 years is that you cannot put it in a sector that lives longer than 3 years. So if there were a bunch of fill plus allocations that had exactly a 3-year term, or if a bunch of fill plus allocations had terms that were different but were specified exact numbers, you'd never be able to put them together into one sector. And just generally, a provider only has limited control over the epoch that a sector activates, and so they need some little buffer here. All right, so long story short, the built-in market actor needs to have some policy that the client can only specify one number for their deal duration, and this FIP proposes that number be interpreted as the minimum term for the deal. So the data must be stored for at least this long, and then the built-in market has to pick some number for the maximum, which is some number larger than that minimum. And so one of the policy questions is how much larger. We need to make it just a little bit larger to be practical. We could make it a lot larger. One of the arguments for making it a lot larger is that many clients, evidence suggests that many clients would like to specify really long deals, but they can't because the built-in market is lame and can't support that. And so a longer one is a better representation of what the clients actually want for those cases. But on the other hand, there are some clients who don't want to specify a really long term, and so then not increasing the term maximum by too much is a better representation of those clients' needs. All those will be fixed 6 months from now when we do the final round of changes in this, and then we'll have clients that can specify both the term min and max and make their own arguments about this. But we have this stepping stone where, in order to keep all of the client-facing APIs and tooling the same, there's no facility for the client to specify the term range, and they're using the built-in market actor is acting as their delegate. So I think, I can't remember whether I put 6 months or 1 year as the placeholder value for this in the FIP itself. So relatively large amount, 6 months. So relatively large amount in order to make deals easy to pack while doing a pretty reasonable job of respecting clients' deal terms. We could possibly make it shorter, but we've got to pick a number for that. The other big question here is actually, let me pause just briefly. I'll take questions on that point before turning on to the migration, which is the other point. Jen.
Yeah, I guess I asked you in DM already, but we have product people here. I'm wondering, do people think that we actually need a method and to allow client to actually reduce the term max if they want to? Right now, it's not intent because we do believe that clients want to keep their data as long as possible, as some people suggested in the discussion. But do you think it's necessary? So the basic protocol is making a decision for them, saying you define the rich as this, we're gonna add 6 or 1 year to that. You suggested maybe 6 months is reasonable. Do we need a method to actually allow client to reduce that?
I think given that like in basically 1 or 2 network upgrades after this, we'll allow people to specify max. I don't necessarily think it's worth adding like something that's just going to be used for like 6 months for this. I also think that in general, like the main pushback that I have on like just like massive extension is that there are explicit clients that have shown up that want like a specific term for where they care their data is stored, but that term tends to be on the order of magnitude of 1 year. Like typically the clients that we've seen that come through that have like a requirement on how long they care about their data being stored, that's like a 12-month horizon. And so like tacking on, 3 months or 6 months beyond that, I feel like it's relatively justifiable, not super unreasonable, easily defensible, especially given that it's like a time boxed implication on the network. So my personal vote would be, already complicated FIP, already got a bunch of different changes. I am more of the opinion that I think like picking a reasonable number, if that's 6 months, that's fine. If it could be even shorter, maybe we can consider 3 months, but I think something like that would be fine for the time being. That's my opinion, and not like necessarily Phil Plus at large. Yeah. I don't, we did talk to the Phil Plus community about this. It did not seem like a super contentious point for what it's worth. Yeah. Gillen, anything you want to add?
Great. Thanks for that. Yeah, reducing it to 3 months could well be reasonable. That should be enough, certainly enough buffer for just scheduling sector commitments, probably enough buffer to make backing reasonable. Okay, great. Oh, Molly, yeah, question.
Yeah, just to Jennifer's suggestion of clients being able to like go in and change a max duration after the fact over time. I feel like there's maybe some like concerns there, because if clients are able to change the duration on an existing deal after it's been packed into a sector, then that would be able to become shorter than the sector it's in and potentially cause problems. So it seems like that pathway might have issues, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Yeah, I think you're correct, Molly. That's the first time I've heard Jen say something like that. You might have. I'm not sure if she intended to say what she said, but no, there's no facility to reduce a term maximum after the allocation has been made. You're right; it wouldn't violate the invariant.
Okay, and maybe the side question there is, sorry, you said that from the Phil Plus side of the world, like if all deals suddenly got increased by an additional 6 months of duration, that like the Phil Plus community is like, yeah, nope, that seems fine, versus like clients explicitly wanting the facility to state like, yes, I want my deal to be able to go up to the max. Please make that happen. Like the opt-in versus opt-out nature of this, I think is a important thing that we should make sure is hitting people's expectations and not something that comes as a negative surprise one way or the other.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks, Molly. So I think the conversation, we had a bit of a roundtable with the notaries and a couple of the more involved folks in the community earlier today. The main takeaway was that the opt-in, opt-out discussion was significantly more controversial and heated when it came to the migration aspect of these sectors and like what we'd expect to see from the ability to extend to like sector duration lifetime max or whatever, versus like some like blanket amount, and who could take part in the decision of moving a sector over. And so in general, like this part of it, which is just like, oh, like in the case that we are deciding that an allocation needs to be given slightly additional breadth, seemed to be like less of a heated topic as long as that duration wasn't substantively large. And the primary pushback for it being really large is like a dilution thing, where it's like, oh, how valuable would like data cap be for us a year from now? Will we still be able to support like very, very cheap deals, yes or no? And like, what does ROI look like for an SP, and how much effort does an SP need to put in to maintain like a relatively reasonable, predictable outcome for the work that they've done right now in terms of what it will yield them in the future? And so based on that, like at least my takeaway from that conversation was like, let's talk about the process that we want to have for the migration side, because I think that's where people were very vocal about what should and should not be allowed to proceed, especially given that we have an opportunity to cut down on some of the initial abuse and potential misuse of data cap that's happened in the past, and how that could be continually leveraged further for like unfortunate upside, let's say, and less on this if this was like a 6 month or less thing.
And now I was think of like my question is like if the client that do not want to store the data that long, they can put the deal duration shorter because they can assume the term max is going to be longer. So like I think my question was less valid now. Sorry.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, just to specify, this conversation is about net new deals that are going to happen until we get the fact that there's a max allocation allowed. Yeah. Which is, to me, it's like, yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to the migration combo then.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Steve. Yeah. So yes, that was about net new deals. It's good to hear. We've got room for a buffer here without annoying anyone too much. We'll specify some buffer on the order of months. Yeah, as you say, a client, as long as that buffer is well known, which it can be, a client who definitely wants their incentivization to stop at some point should just specify their term as 3 or 6 months prior to that point, and then
exactly.
They can be assured.
For what it's worth, we also have a governance call on Tuesday where we'll be explicitly highlighting any of the outcomes from this conversation. So we'll have pretty good turnout and feedback if anything changes for whatever reason, Alex.
Cool. Okay, so the other topic is what to do about all of the existing sectors and deals. The simple answer here is nothing, and we leave all the existing sectors and deals in their current state with their spread out QA power and their existing ways of doing things. However, this raised the question that perhaps some clients who really wanted long terms in the first place have not been given an opportunity to specify those long terms. And it would be nice to give those clients an opportunity to specify that actually they wanted 5 years in the first place, but the market at the time couldn't support that. And that would of course add incentive for the providers of those sectors to keep those sectors committed, which is good for the stability of the network. However, so that suggests some kind of migration, where some way of migrating existing sectors into the new world. But I want to point out that migration has a lot of limitations. It's not obviously a good thing. It has to be opt-in on the provider's part because the old QA power mechanism spreads the rewards out over the sector's lifetime. It's possible for there to be a deal that's already expired, which for the rewards have not already been earned. And migrating such a sector would cause the power to be dropped. It would cause a loss in power for that provider. And so we can't unilaterally do this. It has to be opt-in from the provider's side at least. But so limitations, because we have this constraint that, so a migration would mean creating an allocation, retrospectively for a deal that's already been sealed. In order to maintain the invariant that the allocations, that a sector cannot contain an allocation with a shorter term maximum than that sector's scheduled expiration. The allocations that we would create would have to specify that the maximum, the minimum term for the allocation would be whatever the deal term was, and the maximum term would be whenever the sector is going to expire, which can be longer than the original deal term. And so the effect of that would be that instead of having the QA power spread out over however long the sector's life is, the client would just get the provider would just get full 10x power until their sector expires. Because providers can extend their sectors unilaterally by 1.5 years already today, basically assume that any provider who's going to migrate such a sector would extend it to live for 1.5 years first, and then migrate it, and then get 1.5 years of full 10x power, regardless of whatever term the deal had specified originally. The deal could have 1 epoch left to live at the time they do this, and they would migrate that into 1.5 years of full 10x power. It's also likely, and so this is not necessarily, it depends on your opinion about of the clients perhaps as to whether this is good or bad. Clients who wanted their deal to be short, it's bad. And for clients who may have abused the Fill Plus no system to gain data cap, it's bad for the network that we extend the impact of that for a bonus 1.5 years. You double the impact of it, more than double the impact of it, really. It's also that the proposal also specifies that clients can increase the term maximum for their allocation at some point after it's been created, up to the 5 years that they could have specified at the start, if this system had already been implemented. And so in the case of fraudulent clients, we can basically assume that all of the fraudulent actors will increase their Fill Plus allocations to 5 years after migrating the sectors. And so the impact of a migration is that all of the bad QA power lives for 5 more years from now. Presumably some of the good QA power was because the clients actually wanted short terms. So those ones are not going to, so either, both we violate the client's term, but also the providers of those have less advantage than the malicious or the ill-intentioned providers. And there was something else that I've lost my train of thought. Anyway, so it's not at all a clear win for this migration. On the other side, FIP36 has a big problem with inequality of access to multipliers if we don't allow migration. All of the well-intentioned providers who took full plus deals, perhaps from our data programs or so on, will not be able to extend those sectors to take advantage of the multipliers unless we let them migrate the QA power into this world. But we have no way to distinguish between parties here and let the good people do it, but not the bad people, if I'm to massively oversimplify it. So the migration is a big compromise. If we don't implement it, it seems bad for FIP36. I wish there was another way to resolve the inequality of access that FIP36 has, so that we wouldn't face this decision. But the migration, if we do allow migration, then existing deal terms will go for at least 1.5 years more, despite the client's term, and fraudulent data cap will likely be extended for 5 years. So also the migration is complicated. So this is a decision I don't have like a clear. There's not a clear answer for this. It's a tough compromise either way.
Alex, I have a question. Like, you mentioned that like the migration, the opt-in migration, it must be triggered from the storage provider side. I'm wondering why that is the case. Why cannot? Because like we're only talking about the existing deals, right? Like existing verified deals. Why cannot be a thing that client triggers some behavior? I don't know what it is right now. Basically sending a message to the chain saying that client has the intention to have this data keep longer, and then the storage provider either extend the sector and we check, yes, the client has that intention, and we can do the migration accordingly. So it's like, client trigger the actions and SP says yes to that. Is there a technical challenge for doing that?
Let me try and restate. So it must be that the client, that the provider needs to opt in, and you're suggesting also the deal clients opt in prior to a migration. We could implement such a thing. That is, net new work that I haven't considered yet, is to add a new registry for existing deal clients to authorize a migration, and then we could check that all of the deals have migration authorization before migrating them.
I'm curious, can that be done by client just make a new allocation? Oh no, because like they have to make a new deal. Okay, no, that doesn't work. I was thinking like client can make a allocation to the CID they have, and then like one storage provider extend the sector, we will check if the allocation exists, and we will claim that as the new power. But again, that's additional engineering work.
Yeah, I mean, look, basically, if we don't do a migration, we're in the new world is like clients can get new data cap and make new allocations, and they can make long allocations later on. And we let the old sectors be, but data that is valuable can be can earn Phil plus again and be committed into new sectors. It's not as ideal as avoiding the reseal, but essentially the new world is that we improve Phil plus governance in the future. We'll do better at allocating Phil plus to good parties, and they'll get longer terms and better rewards for it. And we just move into that world as fast as we can.
Galen Deep, you post a lot of messaging in the chat. You speak up.
Yeah, I think this is a very lengthy conversation with the Phil plus community. I think the main actual takeaway was that people found it really hard to decouple this from 36. Like no matter how you paint it, it just was like, it was like clear preference of, hey, let's not migrate any sectors. And then it's like, well, if 36 is going to let CC sectors get migrated, then we need to have a path where we can get verified deals migrated over as well, because otherwise we're going to get screwed, or like governance process won't move fast enough or whatever. And they'll have resulting loss in ability to catch up to how quickly that network will grow, and we'll get dinged for that relative loss of QAP for the amount of time it'll take for them to catch up. And so it was a tough sort of thing to decouple those things, and ultimately it really felt like the feedback that Gail and I got was effectively support no migration, and in the case that 36 passes, please support migration, or like we really want some kind of mechanism for migration. And so I'm kind of curious in how we can better educate folks to like decouple those things, if that is the explicit intent, or maybe can we explicitly couple those things, and what would that look like?
If we couple this, does things like does the Filecoin Plus community understand they will have to put down extra collateral upon migration as well?
Yes, they did. Yeah. And so I think the decision was, or the consensus was basically, if it turns out 36 shifts, we need some way to migrate sectors. In that case, can we have a mechanism that includes SP buy off, client buy off? So SP buy off implies that they're aware that like additional collateral is needed. Client buy off implies that, hey, like you're still interested in, this deal being stored for like a significantly longer future period of time. And we also entertained the idea of having like a notary buy off, where we're like, what is the proposed mechanism by which we can actually have like a vote across the community? Per deal is difficult. There's about just shy of 6 million deals in the Phil Plus world, but maybe there's like some broader stroke mechanism that we can propose for like some sets of deals can get extended, some cannot, and we have like notaries vote on that or veto that. And that's kind of where the direction was headed today. I know there's a couple of hands up too. I don't want to take all the airtime.
Ayush, do you want to ask yours?
It's not a question, but yes, I guess I'll summarize to say that I'm fairly strongly opposed to this idea, to the idea of an opt-in migration. And I think there's kind of 3 reasons or 3 themes why. Number one, I don't think we have a clean design for how to do this. So, and I think you hit on this point already, Alex. Like, it just feels like whatever we do wouldn't actually be correct in some sense. In that, yeah, if you can extend right before the migration, that just feels like, yeah, there's a pretty big way to game the system. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, I think, is I don't know that it's especially well motivated. I don't know that we, I feel like the arbitrary statement of there could have been clients that would have wanted to make longer deals, I don't particularly find convincing. And related to that, reason number 3 is that philosophically, I don't know how much I agree with the idea of trying to, as we're changing the Filecoin protocol in some substantial way to try and accommodate things that happened in the past. Like, I think we need to be okay with saying that this is a 2-year-old chain now. Deals have been being made on Filecoin for about 2 years. The protocol will continue to change, and we should try to balance incentives across when these big changes happen. But it feels a little bit like, yeah, looking back into the past and trying to engineer the new model to fit that. And I don't know, that almost just smells bad to me. So yeah, TLDR, I don't like this, unfortunately.
Can I, before Galen goes, can I just respond to a message from ZX in the chat? I was responding to it says, I'm not sure how strong the fairness argument is in coupling this to FIP36. It's a good point. Let me say that if FIP36 was not a thing, then I would prefer that we did not do a migration. I think the complexity is not worth it, given that it's a very unclear win. Without FIP36, I would suggest that we do not do a migration. So we could, one point of view could be that we declare that there will be no migration, and then FIP36 has to deal with whatever. Either assert that the fairness is not a big deal, which is sort of what ZX is getting at in his chat message. We decide that FIP36 is good anyway, even with this unfair access, or mitigate it in some other way. And so, to the extent that ZX is saying fairness is not that big of a deal, I would take that as permission to not do a migration. The strongest motivation for a migration here is me trying to unblock FIP36 so that it's possible for it to be accepted despite this. Galen.
Thank you. Yeah, echoing some of what Deepa said, I think that the sentiment that we get is that the migration plan is for existing verified deals. The notaries and SPs and people that we've talked to are confident that that means they will have to pay more collateral based on that extension. The amount of that collateral is another sort of sticking point for them in how much lender support is already available to them and how much liquidity they will need to get the lender support to hit this new commensurate amount of collateral that will be required. And that if the sort of like, again, it is hard to separate these, but if we go forward with 36 and there's an ability for CC sectors to be extended, knowing that that will cost an additional amount of collateral, but less collateral than extending a verified deal sector to the same amount, that the people that we have talked to are like, we're going to be stuck in this game of trying to decide how much liquidity can we get, knowing that CC sectors are going to get extended as much. And is this just going to punt this problem where we have more CC sectors than we have like verified deals, because people are still just gaming into that kind of future state? And is there a way to say, no migration in either case, and it is only the net new deals that can be impacted by 36 and impacted by this new deal length? And so I think that where we are having a hard time is, if 36 is going to allow like longer sector multipliers and CCs to roll into that, how will we handle verified deals that already exist? And how much sort of handholding do we need to go through all of those? Do we need every client to approve every deal? Do we need every SP to approve every deal? Do we need a notary? Do we need to allocate new data cap? And all of that creates sort of new tech debt of how do we capture all those messages that the team is going to have to come up with to say, let's create an array mechanism where a client can send, a more complicated CID array somewhere that says these are the deals, that I approve you continuing up to this max. Now we're going to have to educate clients on how to construct those messages and send them. If we roll into this migration plan, are we going to be trying to get a lot of SPs that are already feeling uncertain in the future? And is this going to make them say, like, the only way that I can keep playing is by doing yet another even more complicated thing to migrate all these existing deals that were already difficult to get? I would rather just take new deals, but I can't because I'm going to get out competed in this other arena. Are we going to like lose even more respect and clout from those SPs by pushing a migration plan like this?
Molly, go ahead.
There are a lot of things in there. I was going to actually respond more to Ayush's point of what evidence do we have that SPs desire a longer deal range than 1.5 years? And I would say, I don't see your skepticism or what evidence you have for that. Because I definitely know of many clients who have requested like 10-year or permanent or infinite deal lengths. And so I think there is actually a lot of demand for longer storage deals. And you can actually look at what is the average length of a deal, a Filecoin Plus deal, and is like a couple of days short of the maximum is the average. And so almost everyone is setting the maximum possible storage length for their deals. And so I think there's actually a lot of evidence that the people who are doing storage deals today would desire that data to be stored by the network long-term. And they do not want to reseal it or go through the overhead of like refreshing all of those deals if they can avoid it, if they can instead focus their sealing energy and capacity on new deals in the future and on onboarding new clients, and that they can minimize the amount of hardware and the amount of energy that they spend on making sure that all of the useful data they're storing today continues to be stored. And so that's, I think, the reason, I guess, overall, whether or not this migration strategy is right, and I think this one is not optimal of like SP triggered with like an unclear how client asks are included. But I think we are going to want ways as the network adjusts its duration lengths. Maybe it becomes 3.5 in the near future. Maybe it goes to 5 after that. Maybe it goes to 10 someday in the future. I don't know what the duration that we'll be comfortable as a network with will be over the next couple of years. I think we will want to be able to adjust Phil Plus deals that were created in the past to meet the new things that we think are reasonable as a network, right?
I think that will be possible for everything that's committed after this FIP 45. So retroactively increasing the term is easy after this FIP 45. Is part of the FIP. But it is a more difficult question for these things that exist today. But thanks.
Yeah, Molly, I think I agree with everything you said. I think I strongly disagree with the line of reasoning. Like, I think if we have interest in clients having longer deals, then that is to me, that is an orthogonal discussion to the product impacts of FIP 45. And, there's multiple conversations in flight about how to support those kinds of longer deals. I think what I'm objecting to is FIP 45 is this very non-trivial change to the deal-making process on Filecoin and some of the factors in place. And it slightly feels like we're into that discussion. We're forcing in this question of opening up the possibility of changing the behavior of deals that were made in the past. It just feels like two different conversations to me, and I don't want them to be combined.
So as pointed out in the chat as well, we are really running out of time. So I think we should table this discussion for now or take it async. And it does sound like there's a lot of conversations that need to happen around this FIP in particular and its relationship to FIP 36 in the coming days. That's really been the case for much of this governance process and in preparation for this upgrade. But we do want to make sure we have time to discuss that. So these tables show updates based on what we've had previously. And many of these things, except for the proposed timeline, are ones that should be very, very familiar to core devs who've been involved in this process. So what we are looking at now, and this is something that Jennifer and I have worked to benchmark in collaboration, driven by Lotus engineering needs, is potentially looking at a mainnet upgrade of Wednesday, November 9th. And what that really means is that for all of the FIPs which are not yet accepted, we would need to complete the governance process on them by Friday, September 23rd, which would mean beginning last call by the end of next week. That is a tall order for some of these, and the interrelationship between certain FIPs complicates that further. But as a reminder, many of these drafts have existed as either drafts or discussion posts for many months. All of these things have been discussed and flagged in weekly governance updates, as well as to core devs previously. And so the threshold for all of these to begin that last call process is having a final and complete draft, which core devs have confirmed, all of which they have, and which are ready for that final sort of consensus gathering process. Again, we're tight on time. These updates carry over async much more easily than the other ones, so I didn't want to take too much time away from that conversation. But are there any concerns or anything that anyone would like to flag immediately that they think is an issue or that they have questions about? Ayush, yes.
I don't think the list of things that are that we have on the left side of the table is achievable in the timeline that we have on the right side of the table. I partnered with Jennifer and trying to create some of those timelines, and that was working on the assumption that the FIPs that would be included were 29, 34, 41, 44, and 45, with 45 far and away being the longest pole of this effort. I think if we do want to include 47 in particular, that is a non-trivial amount of work that I don't think is happening in our already tight timeline. FIP 36, my understanding is the implementation is relatively easy. It's the a consensus side of things that complicate things. Although, as discussed, 36 does have interactions with 45 that threaten the long pole. But right now, unfortunately, I don't think what's on this slide is achievable.
That is the exact kind of flag I was looking for. So that's really important to know. So this list is what many of these things had always been proposed as potential scope. But again, right, the challenge here has always been that there's been this sort of chicken or the egg tension between what needs to be included and what can be excluded. Alex, is your understanding that FIP 47 must be implemented if FIP 36 is?
Yeah, that's my assertion.
Okay, so
I want to confirm, like, heavy plus one on what you said, like the time I proposed to you is based on my understanding on the scope, like today, which is not including FIP 36 and FIP 47, and also means like no migration on FIP 45. Alex is already giving me the engineering estimation that adds on one that full week of engineering work if we do want to do any sorts of migration. So that will make us very tight on this proposed timeline.
Okay.
And also for 45, my understanding is we only need to align on the overall policy, right? Because implementation might be able to come later.
Implementation, I also mean actor, which is
but what's the number for the product policy? 44, right? Or 44?
47.
47 is the product policy, right? The product policy wise, I think what we need to do is align on the policy. The implementation can come after.
That's not correct, CX. So A, the implementation is already done, but B, it's not possible to implement FIP 47 after someone's already made a commitment to a sector that's longer than a year and a half. It's necessary to implement this before allowing the longer commitments. We basically can't do it in retrospect. Once the
And then Kuba also said import has already been done.
Yeah,
that was in reference to the link you sent, which is for the beneficiary.
Yeah, import doesn't mean we have to include it, right? Like I don't think it's.
I mean like
my comment, yeah. We can
not including it is actually additional work at this point almost.
Got it. Okay.
I'm confused. Ayush, can you then clarify if the implementation's already done?
Sorry, for 29. That was for 29.
29, the implementation is done because that is accepted way like a month, 2 months ago. Venus has done the work. FIP 47 is being prototyped, but the work is not done. Molly.
Okay.
Yeah, my hand was actually around. I know there's a set of proposed changes that are coming to FIP 36, which have probably some implications on what is and isn't required based on it. So like, for example, if it's going from 5-year duration to a 3.5-year duration max, that has implications on the risk profile of 3.5-year sectors versus 1.5-year sectors versus 5-year sectors, right? And so potentially that changes whether or not folks would consider FIP 47 required ahead of time.
Stephen? I think we are way over time. Do we want to talk about FIP 36 really quick, or do you want to keep conversation offline? I think we should do an async if people can stay a couple minutes longer.
I agree. And I think that if need be, there seems to be a lot of uncertainty still about what needs to drive planning here. We may want to, especially thinking about governance timelines, we may want to try and schedule something else for tomorrow or very early next week to continue to discuss this further, because I think a lot of this has been async and it's leading to still a lot of open questions as work continues to move at different paces. Yeah, it's to Molly's point, the draft is going to come out tomorrow morning. But for FIP 36.
But the conversation should happen as soon as possible because it's impacting the whole engineering planning.
And the governance planning, I agree. It's the same pressure.
Caitlin, what's the engineering pathway on FIP? The governance play on FIP 36? I don't know.
Few. That's the only one I can answer. So I have one in here, which I'm now hesitant to share because if this timeline isn't going to be acceptable, the only thing that certifies more so is going to be dates. So as has been communicated in the internal coordination channel that we have for FIP 36, which exists just to align stakeholders who are communicating around this FIP. We had looked into doing sort of following precedent for FIP whole, which is what we do for what are considered emergency FIPs. This FIP was reconsidered. It is not an emergency in the same way some network security issues may be. And after speaking in consultation with different FIP authors, the preference is to sort of adopt a very typical last call process and be very, very explicit about requirements for asking community members to either address their acceptance or rejection of this FIP. So the intention was for last call to begin next Friday, depending on how the FIP authorship team deems their panel to go next week. This is still being worked out, obviously, because it depends on timeline for the entire network upgrade. And obviously from a governance perspective, more time is better. But insofar as we've also have this weird coupling between the timing of the upgrade and the timing of acceptance, the focus is really on beginning that last call and being very explicit about asking community members to either support or reject the FIP. Molly?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, my hand was just what you said, Caitlin, on fill polls are used for emergency FIPs. And I don't think that's the case. Often an emergency FIP, like the timeline to get a poll to happen versus an emergency security focused FIP where like maybe we're not even disclosing the bug that a security fix is, you know, attacking, etc. Like that, to me, the fill poll is useful in times where there is contention at an ecosystem level about whether or not to accept something. And it helps us clarify from a governance perspective, what is the will of the network? And I think it is actually very useful in this context. Sure, if we want to do an equivalent to a fill poll because fill poll itself is not technically working for the things that we want, we could do that instead. But I think especially given like the movement here of like, what is the proposal? Like, do people agree with the most recent draft? Depending on what the most recent draft is, etc. And the timeline here on making a decision on whether or not to include an MVP of this proposal in a last call. I do think some sort of poll mechanism that takes a snapshot at a given point in time of community will is really important. Not because it's an emergency or not an emergency, but because it's really difficult to get clarity in a moment about over this, like, you know, this has been in discussion and debate for like 2 years at this point. And so, or not 2 years, sorry, 2 months. And so I want to make sure that that we have an accurate vantage point. And so I would encourage us to do a fill poll if it's technically feasible. If it's not technically feasible, then to do some sort of Slack poll or something whereby we get like deeper vantage point into what actually is the will of the community about this, and use that, because I don't think loose consensus is feasible at this point in time because there's just too much history of voice.
Right, you're right. This is something that we've gone back and forth to with not you and I, but myself and others who've been working and really involved in following this FIP process. What we need to do, right, is move from having this like soft deliberation space to having an actual decision space. The framing around, you know, an emergency FIP, whatever, it's kind of unbounded, you're right. But it was really in this context of, do we have a reason to change the process for this FIP in particular? And what we've learned through this process is it's because crypto economic FIPs have components to them, which make them fundamentally different from most other types of FIPs. And this is something we need to very imminently plan for going forward. For this, you make a good point that if we can't do this, you know, emergency FIPs move quickly, how can we do fill poll? What we found is we do not even have enough time to do fill poll in this context, and there are many, many reasons why. There were also many concerns about how fill poll is natively built to tally votes, which I agree with. And so what we're going to do now is a very kind of explicit ask with a ton of communication around, do you accept or reject this FIP? And that is how we're going to carry it. It's just going to be in a discussion on GitHub as before, with a new thread for the new draft in one place, so everything is clean and easy to follow. I can write up and add more detail to the planning document that's already tracking this, but it is made explicit, and it's supposed to be a more black and white way of saying yes or no, here's how we're going to move forward. And we've already begun to discuss, if the FIP were to fail, obviously authors believe there's a very, very good and time-bound reason for this FIP to progress. If it doesn't, we are bound by that decision, and there is opportunity for them to reconsider, work with stakeholders in a different way, and potentially submit a new draft for inclusion in NV18. But that's a bit out of scope for what we're doing right now.
Like, I have two questions. Are we polling on if this FIP should be accepted based on the updated draft, of course? Like, well, should this FIP be accepted? And are we saying if this FIP, the pool suggests this FIP should be accepted, it must to be included in NV17, or like FIP 29, which is accepted way earlier, however, was not included in NV like 16 because of like scope timeline of the upgrade. Should we consider this as well? It's like this can be included in NV18, or it should only be considered, or like if pool is accepted, we will only consider including it in NV17. Again, this is a huge decision, right? Like, it's impacting all the engineering work for FIP 45.
Caitlin, sorry, Jennifer. I think it would be accepted by the community. That does not dictate core dev engineering timelines. It's the will of the network to accept this FIP, and then it's up to us as core devs to try and act in faith with that, to like make that possible. It does not dictate that it's impossible to ship XYZ upgrade without that FIP. That's not true for any other accepted FIP as well, but it demonstrates that the community will is to include that in this time frame. I do want to double click on ZX's question in the chat around like what does any random GitHub account get a vote on this, or like who does, like, you know, the reason that Filepoll exists is because it allows us to structure the people who kind of have already invested and contributed and participated in the Filecoin ecosystem. So I'm curious how we're going to focus and or limit that. Are people going to be listing their miner IDs, or I don't know, how is that going to work?
I don't know. We're still figuring it out. It's a good question. Adding requirements for, you know, proving your engagement, linking to your past posts, whatever. The Filepoll would not give us a clear yes, no. And with there being so much sensitivity around the scale of miners and their total QAP on the network, we would have a very difficult time disaggregating large miners from small miners and actually demonstrating that this was like a very legitimate vote. There was a lot of concern the second like Filepoll was raised, and as we began exploring this, it was not clear that this was something we could even achieve in the 3 or 4 weeks we would have, let alone the time we have now. And what it's sounding like is there are separate planning processes happening, obviously, like for governance, for engineering timeline, and then within individual teams themselves that are working on the content of these FIPs. CoreDevs is a good place to surface coordination needs here, but we are over time and it's quite late for some of you. And I don't know if we're going to reach resolution rehashing some of these conversation topics now. And I wonder if there's interest in having, I mean, of course, we always have async coordination, but if there's value in having another strategy session tomorrow or discussion session around the network upgrade planning in particular.
It has to be sooner than later. Again, like I want to be able to make decision on FIP 45 and FIP 47. We will have governance challenge on moving FIP 45 into last call if we don't have a decision on FIP 36 sooner than later.
Okay, so what I propose we do is we let the authorship team for FIP 36 add their updated draft. It will be a Friday. Work will be winding down before the weekend anyway. Jennifer, as usual, you and I should coordinate about needs, current thinking, and come up with proposals that work for both of us, timelines and dates for both of us, and push forward and begin to share them async and decide if there's a need to gather everyone together again.
I want to ask, yes, just one last question to Alex. Alex, I'm treating you as our engineering lead for this upgrade. So like from your engineering perspective, like what do you think by when we need an answer of like FIP 36 should? I know it should be yesterday, but like, you know, that's not a acceptable answer.
Yeah, it's very difficult because it's coupled elsewhere. I was just about to make a proposal, which was that I proposed to remove the migration from FIP 45 because absent FIP 36, I don't think we should do it. And then push that to FIP 36, where they can choose whether to specify that we should implement this migration for old sectors, such that they can have new allocations or not. That decouples it scope-wise. We can then settle on the scope of FIP 45, in which case I then no longer need a decision, right? There's still implementation work to be done to make that migration, which someone has to do, probably the same people, but we'll couple it to the FIP 36 acceptance instead. And with the FIP, hypothetically, depending on core dev scheduling, if FIP 36 comes later, the migration comes later with FIP 36.
That's a great proposal. Sounds good to me. So like, I think again, the proposed timeline likely work with the scope. We will say FIP 36 and FIP 47 will be maybe within the NV17 scope. Once we should agree FIP 47 should be a pre-request for FIP 36. So they're kind of coupled together. I would strongly propose that we don't include FIP 47 within scope unless like FIP 36 is within scope, just because like the current timeline is already tight. We will revisit the proposed timeline engineering work again once the pool has a result for us. Does that sound good to everyone? Cool.
Yeah. the scope is a separate question from the acceptance, from the FIP acceptance. I want to get FIP 47 through the governance process on this timeline, so that we still have the option to ship it with 17. But sure, we don't have to commit to that now.
Sounds good. Cool.
All right. So we need this to be a packed meeting. Thanks so much, everyone, for your engagement, your help, and just continuing to be patient and to stay engaged with this process. I think this is the most complicated or unique network upgrade I've certainly ever gone through, but that may not be true for all of you. So we'll upload notes and meeting recording. There was a lot here. If you missed something, make sure you can grab it. It'll be up ASAP. And otherwise, you will be all in touch with each other soon, and also hearing from me very soon as well, with next steps and additional documentation for FIP 36 in particular. Oh, Mehdi, do you have a final point?
Yes. What a busy call.
Yes.
Governance is hard, isn't it? I'll make it very, very quick. I'm sorry, Mehdi, for those of you who don't know me, I'm co-founder and director of Sigma Prime. We've been hired by the Filecoin Foundation a few months ago to build a set of fuzzers to essentially try to catch bugs. I would like to request, if possible, a representative from Lotus and Forest to reach out to me. There's a couple of things that we'd like to disclose, and I'm not entirely sure what the best way to go about this is. We are also finalizing our fuzzing framework, and it'll be good if we can hand that over to someone perhaps from the Filecoin Foundation. So yeah, just making it super quick. Thank you all. Perhaps Caitlin can relay Telegram user handles, or I'm on Discord, I'm on all the typical communication channels.
We love fuzzers. If you want to send me, can I send you a message on Slack? Does that work?
Well, I'm on a few different Slacks. If you can find me I'm on the Filecoin Foundation Slack and the Filecoin Slack. Please feel free to DM me, and we can take it from there.
I found you before. We'll find you again. Yeah, I can put you in contact.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Thank you all. Talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye.